So K-State does, at the end there, have to go for two when it's 20-18. They did not get it. The ball was knocked away from Will Howard. They're in that position because K-State chased the points in the first half when they're up 12-0. They go for the 2-point try. Now, in fairness, on the front end here, bears repeating. The play was perfect, and the ball was there, and Phillip Brooks absolutely has to catch that pass on the 2-point conversion. So I understand a part of what Chris Kleiman's answer here is that you're going to hear when asked after the game about why he did go for two in that situation. As a coach, you'd be like, man, I had it drawn up correctly. We got a play off that we really liked, and it worked. And the throw was there, and we've just got to get that ball caught. But here is what Chris Kleiman said when asked why he went for two at that juncture of the game in the first half.
You always are trying to get to that 14 points rather than chasing it later on. And let's be honest, we had a great play called, and we just didn't execute it. It was open, and we just didn't execute it, or it is 14-0.
If it is 14-0 and Brooks does make the catch at the end of the game, then when you score your last touchdown, you're kicking an extra point to go up 21-20.
That's it.
So there's a lot of upside there to that decision from Chris Kleiman in that regard. Like, the upside is K-State in that position would have been then just putting your defense out there to make a stop to win the game. Having said that, I will say that I disagree with going for two when K-State did. I don't disagree as vehemently as it seems like a lot of people both did at the time and especially in hindsight do.
The hindsight's the easy part.
Obviously, it's the easy part. But I did see a lot of pushback to it even when it happened at the time.
Sure.
And I'll admit, I mean, I was very surprised to look up at that point and see that they were going for two.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I'll throw you another scenario that's not exactly the same, but kind of in the same ballpark, is when K-State lines up to go to 4-2 in Norman.
Yes.
You're talking about a guy who likes to be aggressive, wants to be aggressive, wants to send the message to his team, I'm here with you. We can do this. We're going to do this. Thus, I think his comment there, hey, the play was there, we just didn't execute it. You know? Did it come back to bite him a little bit? Sure. Absolutely. It's tough.
Man, that's such a great point about Oklahoma because that was, at that point, it was you're down by one, right, late in the game, and they had lined up to go for two and then had to burn a timeout, right? Something went wrong, and Kleiman was asked.
Yeah, they had to call time. Well, there actually was a penalty on the play, and they were backed up, and then they kicked.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
And Kleiman had said after the game he had every intention of actually going for it there. So that is gutsy, and I will just say that from my standpoint, at that point in the game, first half, 12-0, it feels like a risk in deflating some of the momentum that you have at that point. It is taking basically a free point off of the board for your offense at a team that's very challenged to score. And I would be more in favor of doing something like that in the third or fourth quarter when you have a better idea of where things are going as far as the final score and how many points are going to be required. That's really my rationale for saying I would not have done it at that stage in the game. But I would also remind everybody, we spent a lot of time complaining about Kleiman not being aggressive enough in the games, in particular last year against Oklahoma State and Baylor, where it felt like some of the decision-making was to not get beat by a lot, keep it from being a beatdown, as opposed to taking chances to try to win the game. So if you are somebody that was in that camp and complaining last year about not being aggressive enough, well, here's a coach that's trying to be aggressive. And I would also say it's kind of along the lines of the new school analytics way of thinking to be going for two more often, going for it on fourth down. Like, these are things that a lot of those who are really into analytics typically favor. I did look up, 538 did a really good piece a couple of years ago with a whole chart that they have. Now, coaches I know have their own charts drawn up for this, but situationally, situation, time, when do you go for it? And so they have one for everything from being behind by 17 to up by 17, and then at what stage in the game. So I'm looking at their little graph here for plus 12. Okay, and so plus 12, most of the time throughout the chart, it will tell you to go for it. I will say the one area where it dips into favoring typically not going for it is like end of the second quarter to middle of the third quarter. So it's kind of right on the borderline of like.
Sure.
But the point to me is I think it's a
That's why we're talking about it.
I think it's a defensible enough position, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't think this is egregious, fireable offense. I disagree with it, and I would not have done it. But I think it's defensible enough, and I'm not going to complain a whole heck of a lot about a coach that's wanting to be aggressive and wanting to abide by something that I would view as more of like a new school way of thinking. Because I spent a lot of time complaining about not being aggressive enough and being too old school here up until 2018. So that's where I sit on it.
Well, there's a lot of things to chew on here. I think you touched on something that let's say that I think analytics has changed the thinking of some coaches. Would you agree with that? I just think that and the reality of it is you do have some coaches that are willing to take more risk than others. That's just the nature of it. I mean, as an example, Bob Stoops comes to mind. Early in his days at Oklahoma, when they weren't as good as they were in the later years, he rolled the dice a hell of a lot. A bunch. Because he felt like he had to.
Yeah. And I think I even saw somebody mention to me and say to me, is there a part of this that is being in a position where you're at North Dakota State, where you're typically manhandling everybody, you have the superior talent, is that where this aggressiveness comes from? And I think that may be a fair point to bring up. Do you have to recalibrate it to what you are at K-State? Kleiman's already talked about recalibrating his special teams approach at K-State because he knew he didn't have the talent advantage that he did at North Dakota State on offense and defense, so you needed to devote more resources to that phase of the game. Maybe there needs to be a recalibration here to, hey, I can't be quite as aggressive because I don't have as dominant of a team. Even though that is sort of the opposite of what you're saying about Bob Stoops there. But it doesn't seem like Kleiman has any intention of that right now at all based on his answer after the game.
Well, I guess what I will wrap this up by saying it this way. And again, if the perception is that I'm in the coach's corner, maybe that's so. I guess what the way I chose to look at it was, before even asking him about it, was that I believe this team right now, they were doing well in the game. I get that point. And I get, again, maybe fence riding a little bit here. I understand both sides of the argument. I believe what we're dealing with here is a coach who understands the challenges in which he's coaching under with an offensive football team that struggles at times to score. You make that 2-point conversion, it's totally different at 14-0 as opposed to 12. That's all I'm saying. It was there. It should have been a play that was made, but it wasn't. And it came back to haunt him a little bit, no question about it.
If I can throw in one more thing, it seems like Kleiman's whole philosophy here is more based on a big picture strategy and philosophy than it is that specifically in-game situation, right?
You're talking long-term?
Like long-term,
because he talks about that all. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, too. He is, by nature, pretty aggressive a lot of the times. I don't think – well, I was going to say I don't know that it's out of the ordinary, but he is pretty aggressive. And I think sometimes that's I just think there are more guys doing it now just because that's what the analytics are saying. And a lot of that is probably because they have struggled to score. You know, if they're somewhere in the back of his mind, tell me that you disagree with this if you do, and that's okay if you do. But that's what I'm saying. In the back of your mind, we're at 12. 13 sounds good, but if we get to 14 against this team and go to halftime there, I like my chances.
I think it absolutely was a big part of it.
Yeah.
I think, again, if I'm doing the calculations here at that point in time, I'm saying, well, we've already had 2 red zone field goals here in the first half today. We had a first and goal at the 2 last week against West Virginia and couldn't find a way to score. We have not been very good offensively in these types of scenarios. I'm not going to risk giving up a free point because of that. That's another part of my
I get that
short-term calculation, but that's why I make the point that it seems like this is more based on like long-term aggressiveness and wanting to send that message.
Yeah,
to
and
the
I think that's what I'm saying too. I think he's he's been an aggressive guy most of his head coaching career. I think that's just part of what he is. And I understand both sides of the argument. I didn't have as big a problem with it as some did, and I get it if you do, because if you kick it, then you're not chasing it there, as they like to say, and I understand that. I'm just trying to make the point that I think this is what he is. I think he is pretty aggressive in those, and I didn't ask him about it in the radio post. Frankly, it just kind of slipped my mind, which was dumb on my part. I should have asked him. Should have. But you guys did. You heard the answer. It was there. We had the right play call. We just didn't make the play. So I don't think I could be wrong. I don't know that he feels all that bad about it. I think he'd do it again.